Hi, my name is Rich Wagner. I'm a student at Western Governors University. This is a presentation discussing congressional term limits. Americans continue to disapprove of the job Congress is doing. Gallup has been asking the question in their polls, do you approve or disapprove of the way Congress is handling its job, since 1974. This graph is showing the results from 2000 to 2014, and as you can see, the approval rating has steadily declined. In the last 3 years, has been right around 13%. So it's not surprising that many Americans are looking for congressional reforms. One of the most popular reforms that gets talked about is congressional term limits. Supporters of congressional term limits hope that it will reduce federal spending and help to remove the career politicians from office and replace them with citizen legislators. However, research suggests that term limits will not be an effective reform because term limits are not shown to reduce government spending. And the types of politicians that run for office don't change when term limits are enacted. And also, the rights of voters to elect qualified candidates would be limited. So, for spending, a study by Reid in 1998 called The Relationship Between Congressional Spending and Tenure with an Application of Term Limits showed that there was no significant connection between the average tenure of politicians and how much they were willing to spend. Some groups they studied spent more as tenure went up, others spent less as tenure went up. Another study done by Earler in 2007 of states that have 48 different states showed that states with term limited houses tended to increase their spending. And this was looking at data between 1997 and 2001. So about citizen politicians, a study by Niemi and Rulison in 2011 called The Effects of Term Limits on State Legislatures and Their Applicability to the Executive Branch. One of the things that they found in their study was the type of person running for office did not seem to change. You still had the same type of politicians running for office in states that had term limits. So the hope that citizen legislators would come and take over and replace the career politicians is not something that's been realized in states with term limits. Another point is the right of voters would be impacted. Term limits prevent politicians from running past their allotted number of terms, and therefore the citizens can no longer elect them for that office. Today, citizens quite frequently elect the same representative for many terms in a row. A study written by Mendez in 2013, based on some additional Gallup poll questions, where they compared a person's approval rating of Congress to a person's approval rating of their own congressman, showed that people were much more supportive of their own congressman, at the same time being very unsupportive of Congress. So enacting term limits does require a constitutional amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court determined this in their case, U.S. Term Limits, Inc. versus Thornton in 1994. So to even consider enacting term limits, we first have to figure out how to enact a constitutional amendment. And if enacted, term limits would reduce average tenure, that's not a question. But the goals of term limit proponents would likely not be realized. Spending is not shown to be related to tenure. Increase in citizen legislators is not realized in states with term limits. And voter rights are needlessly restricted. If we do end up with term limits, don't expect significant changes. Other reforms targeted at specific issues such as campaign finance reform may prove to be more effective at reducing government spending. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
If we want to enact term limits, regardless of what the political scientists say, what can we do?
Well, that's a good question. There are several things you can do. One is write your congressman, let them know how you feel. Next time you have congressmen up for election, vote for those who support term limits. And there are groups you can join too. There's restartcongress.org and termlimits.org that support enacting term limits and attempting to try to make a congressional amendment, or constitutional amendment, excuse me. Any other questions?
Why do people keep re-electing the same politicians if they say they are for term limits?
That's also a good question. People continue to re-elect the same politician. There's a lot of discussion about that. One reason discussed is that the incumbent politician has much more visibility and can raise more money for his campaign finance, or can raise more finances for his campaign and become more visible. And so, by the sheer fact that he's on TV more, gets elected. Another reason could be that a state that wants to enact term limits, if they were to not re-elect the same person, kick him out of office and hire a new person, would effectively lose power against those states that continue to re-elect the same person. So if all of your congressmen were junior and all the other states were senior, you'd have less influence in Congress. So it may not be a wise thing to do until all states are forced to abide by term limits equally. Thank you for your time. That concludes our presentation.